This video is going to focus on watering and fertilizing of plants, but it's going to focus specifically on cedars since they are the most sensitive to improper watering and are often planted in larger numbers, increasing the risk. If you are doing a hedge of boxwoods, yews, or any other plant, the principles of good watering will remain the same. The difference will be the frequency of watering. The recommended frequency of watering boxwoods or yews will be determined at the time of sale based on the drainage characteristics of your soil. You will know what your characteristics are of your soil after you've watched this info video, and you'll be able to do a test hole to see how quickly the water drains in your property. You will receive written guidelines based specifically on your drainage characteristics. This becomes very important if you want to have a successful cedar hedge. Cedars make a beautiful hedge that will provide enjoyment of your property while significantly increasing the value of your home. A home with a yard that provides privacy is always a desired feature of any home buyer. In fact, studies have shown that no other home improvement provides a return that plants can offer. Please keep in mind that the following information is based on the assumption that your plants have properly cultivated root balls. If that should not be the case, then you are best to follow the instructions of the seller, since they warranty your plants and obviously may guide you differently. You can be assured that every plant we sell has a properly cultivated and inspected root ball. In fact, the root balls on all of our balled and burlap plants are inspected at least 8 different times before we transfer them to a customer, and we never sell improperly cultivated root balls. We will do everything we can to within our control to give you the best root ball and instructions to have 100% success with your plants. In turn, we ask that you follow our instructions so that the factors like planting and watering ensure your plants not only survive but prosper to fulfill their potential, giving you years of pleasure while increasing the value of your property. Gardening is very similar to building a house, where you have to have a very strong foundation, otherwise you're going to run into problems later on. With plants, it's your roots. That's your foundation. That's what everything starts with, is those roots. If you don't have good roots, everything else is a waste of time because the plant's not going to survive. You can plant it properly, water it properly, do everything right, but if you don't have a good root system to start off with, that's where you're going to have a problem. And this is the biggest reason why cedars in particular will fail. It's because a lot of the growers have taken shortcuts with their root systems. Now at Save on Plants, we cultivate our own roots, and we guarantee you 100% that you're going to get a very good root ball with us. That's what all of our focus is on. We're very proud of that, and we're not going to change our methods to cut the cost, which unfortunately is what's happening in the industry. In order to save on shipping costs, everyone's going with a smaller root ball, shaking the dirt off the roots, repotting them later on, etc. We will not do that. It's just not a good idea, especially with cedars of all plants. So with us, you don't even have to ask about the roots. 100%, you're going to get a very good root ball, properly fibered, etc. Now, what you also need from us will be knowledge on how to plant it and how to water it. So we accept full responsibility for the roots and for giving you the knowledge that you need to be successful in your gardening project. On your side, what you will be responsible for is the actual planting and the watering. Now, planting is something that some people are afraid of. They think you have to be a professional to plant trees and that. In fact, my experience says that most homeowners do a better job than many professional landscapers. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. Not all of it being knowledge. A lot of it is just trying to get the job done as quickly as they can to move on to the next one. Whereas you being the homeowner, you will take a little bit more patience in doing the little things that will make a difference with your garden. And we are very happy to work with you and give you all the information you need on how to plant a tree properly. Not only that, you'll save a lot of money by planting your own tree. So we really encourage you to plant your own plants, and of course you're going to be doing your own watering, and we'll talk a lot about that in this info video, which is really the main focus is on the watering. And we will give you all the knowledge and information that you need. All you have to do is plant it and water it, and you should have 100% success. Now, why do cedars have a high failure rate? We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because we talk about it in other videos, but it comes back down to the root balls. Root balls are everything with all plants, especially with cedars. You have to have proper root pruning, cultivation, and handling. This is why most cedars fail. They just don't have a good root ball when you purchase them. So we do not take any of the shortcuts. We still do things the old-fashioned way, where they're root pruned in the field every year at the right time of the year. We don't shake the dirt off the root ball, etc. We don't use treated burlap on our root balls. Treated burlap will restrict the roots from spreading out once they're into the ground. And again, all this is covered in other info videos, so I don't want to dwell on it too much. But if you are interested in that, please look at the other info videos on cedars. The second or biggest reason after roots for cedars failing is improper watering. Many people will rely on things like sprinklers, which are a terrible way to water cedars. They're great for grass because with grass you only have to penetrate about an inch, inch and a half down below the soil surface, and the grass is as happy as can be. However, if you did that to a cedar, it's going to die. It does not live on water at the top 1 inch of the ground. It needs the water down at the bottom of its root ball. So you have to penetrate the soil all the way through, get down to the bottom of that root ball if you want to have a successful cedar. And in fact, you can say that's true for every plant. You want to get down to the bottom of the root ball and literally even have the water go past that root ball down. And sprinklers just don't do it. They'd have to be left on for 6 hours in many cases. They don't penetrate deep enough because they're not left on long enough, and they do a random spray. So someone's not going to water their grass for 6 hours just so that the corner can hit the cedar. So do not rely on sprinklers. It's almost a guaranteed formula for failure. In fact, don't rely on sprinklers for anything except grass. You will have to supplement the watering of your plants with direct supply of water or a soaker hose, which we will cover later on. Another issue, not as common, but it's poor drainage, so that what you end up having is an accumulation of water around the root ball that doesn't disperse quickly enough. The roots end up sitting in the water for too long, and just like a human being, will drown. They suffocate. Cedars or any other tree cannot sit in water for long periods of time. That water has to be allowed to drain completely before it receives water again. And hopefully you've got reasonable drainage where the water just doesn't sit there forever. If you do, you'll have to take some precautions, which we can cover with you on a one-on-one basis should that be the case. Sun exposure is another problem with cedars. They don't get enough sun. People put them in total complete shade. They have to have a minimum of 4 hours direct sunlight every day. If it's cloudy, that's okay. But basically 4 hours of unobstructed sunlight from trees or houses. Okay. And plant competition can cause a problem with cedars also. You don't plant them near large trees or any other bushes, because those other established plants will suck the water away very quickly that the cedars will need, as well as the nutrients. So keep in mind the location of your cedars should not be near or underneath the canopy of a tree. The very last problem that you might have with cedars is animal damage. It's not as common, but the deer will chew on cedars and do quite a bit of damage there. Dogs will do their business on a cedar. This will be usually seen at the end of a row near a sidewalk where the dogs go for walks and they do their thing. They will kill a cedar. During very, very cold winters, you might see a little bit of rabbit nibbling at the bottom of the cedars, but not enough to do any permanent damage. Generally speaking, mice or rats do not bother cedars at all. There's a new friend around now. He's called a vole. He's basically a blind mouse that lives underneath the ground, and they are very aggressive at eating roots, and they'll eat the roots of basically any plant. I've heard many different stories. They're not overly common, but they're out there, and that might explain a problem that you may have had in your backyard. It could have just been a vole. Now, drainage test holes are extremely important. These are going to tell you what type of soil and drainage you have at the location where you're going to place the plant, because drainage is everything. This is going to determine how much water and how often you water your plants. The more test holes you do, the better, especially with some of these newer properties where the dirt's been moved around by bulldozers, etc. You will have quite a range of soil even in a small backyard, where you'll have very good drainage at location A, but location B, which is only 5 feet away, will have a totally different characteristics as far as draining. I've been at people's homes where We did the test holes, and literally within 5 feet of each other, one drained within an hour, the other one 2 days later was still full of water because they had different soils in those two different areas. So plants have to be watered differently based on the drainage at that particular location. So my advice is, for the best results, you do a test hole at the location of every single place you're going to put the plant. And this isn't a waste of time because you got to dig the hole for the tree anyway. So dig the hole for the root ball. That's your test hole. You fill it up with water, monitor all the different holes, and make note of how quickly they drain. If they all drain at the same rate, great. It's a lot easier for you to monitor the watering. If you've got some oddballs in there, make a note of that and keep that in mind as the season progresses and you have to water them through the summer, etc. Fill your holes slowly with water right to the very top. And again, for like a 6-foot size cedar, you're probably looking at about an 18-inch deep hole. And you have to allow that water to drain completely before watering again. This is very important because if you don't allow the water to drain completely from the hole before you water the tree again, the tree is literally going to suffocate because it's not getting any air. It has to have that water drained away so that it can get some of the air that's down in the soil. You don't want to suffocate your plant by keeping it underwater for too long of a period of time. And these are the test holes. We're also going to have what we call inspection holes located between your trees that will be your eyes to the bottom of the root ball. It'll tell you what's going on at the bottom of the root ball, whether or not there's water sitting there. Because if there's water in the bottom of your inspection holes, there's going to be water at the bottom of your root balls, in which case you don't need to water. Okay. And if you have very slow drainage, you're only going to fill your holes halfway up when you actually have the plants in there versus all the way to the top. And your inspection holes will help you monitor that. Now, you have to start getting an idea of how much water to put into these plants and how much water comes out of your hoses or your soaker hoses or whatever method you plan to use to water your plants. In this little photo here, we have what we call just a 5-gallon pail, readily available at most hardware stores. You probably have a couple kicking around the backyard, and they'll say 5 gallons on them. But to know that you have the right size, they're approximately 19 inches tall, 12 inches or so wide, and it's just 5 gallons American is what's on there, which is fine. Now, what you can do with these is you can lay a soaker hose over top of one of these pails, and you let the soaker hose run to give you an idea how much water comes out of your soaker hose. So in other words, if it takes 6 hours to fill up your pail by running the soaker hose continuously, then for a 6-foot tree, which we recommend 1 5-gallon pail at every watering for average soil, you're going to have that line on for 6 hours. And this is where a lot of confusion arises. People don't realize that soaker hoses do not release a lot of water. They have a lot of resistance. They basically sweat. And it takes a long time for that water to seep down into their root system, which is what you want. So if it takes 5 or 6 hours to fill up that pail with water, then for a 6-foot cedar, you're going to have to leave the soaker hose on for 5 or 6 hours. Now, don't panic. It's not as much water as you think it is. It's again, it's not like an open line garden hose. It doesn't work that way because of the restriction. It comes out quite slowly. Now, having said that, every soaker hose is going to be different. Manufacturers make them differently, etc. Your house pressure water will be different. So that's all going to have effect on how quickly it comes out of that soaker hose. And that's why it's important to measure the amount of water that's being released by your soaker hose by laying it over a 5-gallon pail. That's your test to see how quickly the flow is of coming out from your soaker hose. If you plan to water it directly, individually, with a garden hose line, what you need to do is turn your valve to the setting that a slow setting, because you don't want the water to rush out quickly from your garden hose. Otherwise, it runs away from the root system. That's what's nice about a soaker hose. It comes out very slowly and will seep down. So you actually don't waste much water with the soaker hose. It runs down the roots, which is where you want it to go, and it goes slowly rather than running away from the plant. If you are going to use a direct open end garden hose, the water will come out very quickly, and that's not good because it runs away from the plant. So you have to set your valve at such a rate that it comes out very slow, like literally a trickle. You can then place the hose into your 5-gallon pail at a very slow trickle and time how long that takes. And you can mark the valve handle so that you know where you turn that valve handle in order for the water to come out at a certain rate, and then you know how many minutes to run it per tree. Uh, every year we try to come up with some more guidelines and more ideas on guiding our customers so that they know how much water to place on these trees. 99% of the customers don't have any trouble, but there's always something that comes up every year where someone just missed a point we made. So if this sounds like a little bit too meticulous, just bear with us. There's a reason why we have to go through this. We just every year something else comes up, and we try to come up with as much guidance as we can to make it foolproof, so that every customer has 100% success. And these are a couple of changes we're introducing this year, or suggesting, and I think they're good ones. So again, if you're not going to use a soaker hose, you want to do a direct line, not a problem. Slow trickle, very slow. Mark the valve where it's located, time it, and then that's how long you will run the hose at those cedars as you move from one tree to another. Because what often happens, people, especially as the summer goes on, people start thinking, the tree looks good, that's enough water, and they move on, and they're not watering that often. If you're controlled by a timer or a watch, whatever you're going to use, then it's not guesswork anymore. And where this system kind of falls apart is when you pass the job on to someone, whether it's one of your children or a neighbor. They tend to spend a lot less time watering the plants than you might have intended, especially when you come back from vacation. We hear it all the time. Plants are great, came back from vacation, and now they don't look very good. Well, chances are they weren't watered that well when you're off on vacation. So control it with, I guess, a system that's measurable, such as timing for either the soaker hose or for the direct open line. But I do suggest the soaker hose as being the best option, and the least likely to be ignored, because it's not that much work. You just turn the valve on, shut it off in 6 hours, and you're done. One customer that we had in Toronto, either the soaker hose he had was very restrictive, or no pressure in his house. I'm not sure which, but he had to run his 12 hours in order to get a 5-gallon pail full of water. So if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. Again, you're not wasting that water. It's just coming out very slowly. That's all. So don't panic because it's on for 12 hours. In this photograph there, you see the soaker hose there, and literally that's how it works. It literally sweats off, and so it's not very high rate of flow. So now you can bury the soaker hose underneath the mulch if you don't like the way it looks, etc. That's not a problem. Just make sure that you're not just judging the top couple inches of soil, that hey, the top's moist, I don't have to water. That's not the best way to do it. You have to look into the inspection pipe to see if there's any water left at the bottom of the inspection pipe. We're going to cover that in a few minutes here. Okay, so we say for cedars 4 to 6 foot height range, you're looking at 5 gallons minimum per watering per plant. And we will discuss with you how often you're going to water based on your soil. But for every watering, you'll be using 5 gallons of water. If you're in that 6 to 10 foot range, you move up to the 10 gallons. Okay, and think of it as a continuum. The 4 foot cedar might be fine with say 3.5, 4 gallons, etc. 6 foot definitely a minimum of 5 gallons. 7, 8 foot be 8 gallons. Up to 10 foot, 10 gallons. But 10 gallons is generally what you're going to be using for one of the 6 to 10 foot type cedars. And you really can't overwater them as long as you allow the water to drain completely before you water again. That is the big problem, is people may water too often, not allowing the water to drain away completely. So this is basically just a schematic of what I described previously, where that black line is your soaker line, and it's over top of a pail. And you turn on your soaker line, and just time how long it takes for it to fill the pail. Now you know you have to leave your soaker line on for so many hours, and it will be hours for sure, guaranteed, before you fill up a 5 gallon pail of water. And again, might be even 12 hours. Whatever it is, The total amount of water is less than if you water directly tree to tree because there's no water running off at all. It's much more effective, goes right down to the roots. Better way of doing it. Now you can also lay the soaker line over top of the hole if you've pre-dug the hole, and then turn on your line. Say for example you're planting 10 cedars, you've dug your 10 holes to test. Well, lay the soaker line over top the center of the holes and turn the water on, and just time how long it takes to fill them up. Now, if you've got very slow drainage, in the future you are not going to fill them to the very top with water. You can see there's two blue lines there. The lower blue line would be for people that have very slow drainage. This is drainage where it takes more than a day for that water, say the whole thing was full of water and it takes more than a day for it to drain away. Well, you're a slow drainage soil there. So in the future, you're only going to fill that hole up halfway. So if it took you 12 hours to fill your hole with water initially, well, in the future, because of the slow drainage that you have, you're only going to run it for 6 hours, which will fill the hole halfway up with water, allowing it to drain within a reasonable period of time. In this sketch, the amount of water depicted is actually above the ground level. The area is literally flooded, and this is perfectly fine in very well-drained soil to average drained soil. It's not a good idea in poorly draining soil like heavy clay, where the water will take too long to drain completely, which will literally cause the roots to suffocate, just like a person drowning in water. To the left of the root ball in this diagram, you see there's an upwards rectangle. That is your inspection hole. We're going to cover this a little bit later on. But the idea of that inspection hole is just a big old pipe that you locate about, say, a foot or so, or between two of your trees. And the bottom of that pipe is the same depth as the bottom of the root ball. And the pipe is left empty. There's nothing down the center of that pipe. You can place your hand down to the bottom of that pipe, and when you touch the bottom soil of that pipe, you're touching the same depth as the bottom of the root ball of the tree. The idea is now you're not guessing as to whether or not there's water down there. It's basically a set of eyes for you at the same depth as the bottom of the root ball, and you will know when the water has drained completely and when you have to start thinking about watering again. Now you should probably wait about 24 hours after the water is drained completely from the bottom of your inspection hole in most cases. Okay, and this would be the same whether or not you have very slow draining soil or very sandy, fast draining soil. The reason being is that with the slow draining soil, you're only using half as much water. So the roots are not getting suffocated, the water is draining away from them, and the roots at the bottom will bring the water to the upper roots of that root ball, even if they're not sitting in water during that period of time. So don't worry about that. If you get water down to the bottom of the root balls, that's fantastic. That's where you want it. Those roots will bring the water up through the rest of that root system and then to the top of the tree. So again, it doesn't matter what type of soil you have, the period between the waterings will actually be the same in most cases, and that is let the water drain completely and then you're going to flood it again about 24 hours later. Now there are exceptions to this, that being during brutal heat waves, which we usually get once or twice through the summer, sometimes 3 times in the summer. And during a really extreme heat wave, there you would not wait. Once the water has gone to the bottom of your inspection hole, in other words, the water has drained, then you're going to flood it again. So you will be increasing the frequency of your flooding of your plants during heat waves. Now, in some cases you're going to be watering. Some people will choose to water the tree directly with a garden hose. Okay, if you do this, the water may not seep over to your inspection pipe. So your root ball is flooded, but your inspection pipe has no water in it. So if you use the inspection pipe as your test as to when or not you should be watering again, you're going to be overwatering your tree. So in order to overcome this, what you have to do is you have to water not only your root ball, but you have to water your inspection pipe. Now keep in mind you're probably going to be putting about 20 times as much water on your tree as it takes to fill your inspection pipe. And here's a case again where you got slow drainage and the water is not seeping into your inspection pipe. You're not using a soaker hose over top of it, because if you have a soaker hose over top of your inspection pipe and running along the trunk of your tree, then it's automatic. The water is going to go into your inspection pipe at the same rate it's going towards your root ball, and everything's good. Again, this is for people that choose to use a garden hose directly onto the trunk of the tree. They're going to use a timed method. They're going to measure their volume, and they're going to run their hose for an exact amount of time to ensure they're always giving the plant the exact same amount of water, based on what we discussed earlier. So in this case here, you got slow drainage. You're only going to fill the inspection pipe halfway up, and you're only going to fill the root ball area around the plant halfway up, and that has to be determined before you put the plant in, because once you put the plant in, you're not really going to know what it takes to fill that hole halfway up if you're just using a direct hose onto the root ball. Again, we really like the soaker hose. We have to recommend that as our #1 option. It's not that expensive, and it'll probably save you money in water, so I would do that for sure. Especially as the summer goes on. Again, people start backing off because they think the plant looks fine. They cut back on the watering. They get distracted. They go away on vacation. They ask people to water their plants for them. The people just do a couple sprinkles and then they leave. And sure enough, you come back and the plants start dying on you over the next couple of weeks, and it's because they didn't get watered properly during that vacation period. So if you have a soaker hose, it's easier for you, and it's easier for anybody that you ask to water your plants. And again, don't panic if it takes 6 to 12 hours to water it. It's not the amount of water that you think it is. It's a lot less. So just a quick summary about soaker hoses. We really do believe they're the best option. They are very low volume. It comes out slowly. And don't be surprised again if it's going to take 6 to 12 hours. It's not the amount of water that you think it is. There have been situations where customers are adamant that they're not going to water because they don't want to see their water bill go up. Well, needless to say, those plants do not do well. And even if they're covered by warranty, you have to dig up the old ones, put in the new ones, and you're starting all over again. And if you don't water that batch, those are also going to die on you. So you're really not getting anywhere by ignoring the watering responsibility of having plants. If you're adamant about not watering, or you don't want the trouble of watering, then you're best not to have plants, unfortunately. But they are beautiful and they are worth watering. They're a good investment, and yes, you are going to have to spend a little bit more money on water, but it's well worth it, and the return will greatly exceed your investment. Okay, in this particular diagram, we're going to start talking about the importance of the inspection pipe. The top half of this, you see two small circles with the word plant in the center. These would be, for example, 2 cedars, and in the center, just above them, you see a black circle. What that would be is your inspection pipe, and this is just a suggested location. It can be anywhere near the root system as far as that inspection pipe goes. Again, the purpose of the inspection pipe is to see if there's moisture at the bottom of the root ball. Once the moisture is gone, it's time to water. And if you're looking at the bottom part of this picture here, this is a side view of the plants. Again, it shows that the depth of that inspection pipe would be the same depth as the bottom of the root ball. Again, the idea is when you have your hand down that inspection pipe, you're touching the soil. That would be the same as touching the bottom of the root ball. If it's moist there, that's fine. Like, you don't want to have water sitting there. If water is sitting there, you have to wait till it drains. Because when you do water these plants, you're going to water very heavily, and the pipe may fill right to the very top with water, which is fine, as well as the area immediately around the root ball. That's all going to fill with water, but you can't water again until it drains. Once it's drained, once it's gone, you don't feel the water there anymore at the bottom, the soil's starting to go a little bit on the dry side, then it's definitely time to water. In most cases, what we recommend is once the water has drained, if you wait 24 hours, it's time to water again. Here's a longer hedge that we've got in this particular diagram. Again, you see that the soaker hose is laid near the trunks and over top of the actual inspection pipes. The 3 circles with the white centers, those are your inspection pipes. And again, the importance here is to have the exact same conditions for your inspection pipe as you do your root ball. By placing the soaker hose over top of all these areas, you would be duplicating that particular condition. So you want to make sure that those big old pipes get filled with water whenever you run that hose over top of your tree root ball. Now, in this particular one here, you see that we've got some windbreaks at the end of the row of cedars. Just a couple things we want to point out is that we have noticed that it's always the cedars at the end that will either first show trouble or the ones that will die on you over the winter. There's a couple reasons for that. One would be that they are exposed more to the wind. They don't have the protection of the adjacent tree beside them on both sides. They have one side that's fully exposed to the wind and the sun, which will dry them out over the winter time. So by placing a windbreak at the end or after the ends of your cedar row, particularly in the direction of the prevailing wind, which is usually the southwest, this will reduce the airflow through your cedars. It will help all your cedars, but specifically your last cedar. Another thing to keep in mind is that that last cedar at each end is going to receive probably less water than the cedars in between, because you're getting water on both sides from those hoses. And if you don't have the hose going past your root ball, then you may not be getting as much water to those end cedars. So keep this in mind. You may have to add manually some extra water to your end cedars. They will receive less because of their location, but will actually need more because of their location. Again, they'll have more sun exposure, they'll have more wind exposure, more likely to dry out, yet just because of the layout, they're probably going to get more, or they're going to get less water naturally. So you have to compensate for that by maybe giving them an extra pail of water. Very important throughout the warmer summer months, and especially just before the winter. You want to make sure those end cedars get that little extra water, even more so than the ones in the middle. You'll see too that we have a sidewalk depicted on the right side of this slide. And that's where the dogs go for a walk. And when dogs go for a walk, they like to mark their territory. If there are cedars or boxwoods or any other plants near that sidewalk, what is going to happen? The dog's going to mark its territory, and if you have enough Fidos in the neighborhood, you're going to have a dead plant near the sidewalk. And you'll see this very commonly, especially with boxwoods, because people will take those right to the sidewalk for appearance purposes. You'll see that the boxwoods closest to the sidewalk usually are not doing very well, and it is for this reason, animal damage. Okay, so keep that in mind. What you can do is keep your plants a little bit away from the sidewalk, say at least 3 feet minimum, if not more, and give the dog a target. They're really not that fussy as to what they hit. They just want something that they can mark their territory. So a nice stone works really well. It has to be tall enough to attract them. But anything like that along the sidewalk, they'll hit that first. Another option could be to put a post of some sort, or a decoration, whatever you'd like, but anything that will divert the dog's attention away from the cedars or the plants and focus their attention on that particular rock or post, etc. Let's talk a little bit about how often to water, or the hours between watering. Now, something you have to keep in mind, the frequency of watering is going to depend on the temperature. And a lot of the temperature, it's a relative temperature. In other words, hot may not be hot relative to, say, April or July or August. Think of it as if your normal weather in April is 20 degrees Celsius, we'll say, and you hit 25, well, that's a hot day for April. So then you would have to look at your chart below and determine how often you should be watering if you hit hot days in April. 25 degrees in August is not really considered a hot day. It's kind of considered a normal day. For a hot day in August, you'd have to be hitting, say, for example, 30 degrees Celsius. And again, these are not black and white. This is a continuum where you would be adjusting between these extremes. But the idea is for you to understand that the terms of cool or hot It's relative to the time of the year that it is. So to help explain this a little bit better, let's take a look at the first example here. This is for soil that has fast drainage. This is a hole that if you were to fill it up with water, in less than 4 hours, it's gone. Okay, that's fast drainage. Now, if in the month of April you hit 25 degrees, which is relatively hot for April, you would want to be watering, believe it or not, every 12 hours in that particular case if you have this very fast draining soil. I don't want everybody to panic because very few people would have soil that would drain that quickly. If you do, your plants are going to do great. They're going to grow really quickly as long as you give them enough water, because that water will drain quickly away from the root system. But because the soil is so loose, the roots will spread out quickly and the plant will grow very quickly. So there's it's kind of a plus and minus there to having this really nice loose soil. But let's get back to the amount of hours between watering. If you're having normal weather during the month of April, you would be watering about every 24 hours. So 24 hours between the watering. These are, again, just guidelines for people that would have fast drainage. Being guidelines, that's all they are. You have to go look at your inspection pipe to see if that is making sense with these particular charts. If you find things are not adding up, things don't make sense, you're getting confused with how often to water, by all means, contact us immediately. We will walk you through it. These are just general guidelines that will help you know if you're on track or not. Now, in April, say you have cool weather. Cool weather in April might be 15 degrees Celsius, in which case you might only water every 4 days, or here we have hours, so every 2 days. So here we have hours. So if you had cool weather, 15 degrees in April, you would wait 48 hours, 2 days again, between watering. That is for the month of April if you have fast draining soil. Now let's take a look at average draining, which is going to apply to most people. People that have average draining soil, this is going to take 4 to 24 hours for your hole to drain. In other words, you've dug your hole, you've filled it up with water, you timed it, and it's taking 24 hours or less to drain completely. You would fall under the category of our guidelines for average drainage. During the month of April, if you hit 25 degrees, relatively a hot day for April, you're going to water every 24 hours during that hot day. During the month of April, if it's a cool day or cool days coming up, you would be watering every 72 hours, which is 3 days between the waterings. Okay. Let's take a look at slow drainage. What's interesting here is that average drainage and slow drainage have the same frequency of watering. You're watering just as often. The big difference is the amount of water. With slow drainage, you're only going to use half as much water as you would have with average draining. And so you need to know this before you fill your holes in. You need to know how much water is required to fill that hole halfway up. And you're also going to fill your inspection pipe halfway up so that you have the same conditions, inspection pipe and also with your plant. And you're going to water again after the water runs down and it's drained completely. Then you could water again 24 hours or so later. So the condition or the guidelines are exactly the same for average drainage or slow drainage. Big difference is the amount of water. You are going to use less water with slow drainage. Now, there is no magic number for how often to water. We just went through that previous slide where we tried to show you there's guidelines based on the type of soil, the type of weather conditions. It's a dynamic system. It's always changing. So you have to get a feel. You have to understand what the plant needs when it needs it. And every year we try to give you better guidelines and examples so that you understand, because it seems like it doesn't matter how often we do explain or how we explain it, it never fails. Some customer will come back and somehow we didn't communicate very well with that customer what their needs were and they had a problem. So we want to make sure we do everything we possibly can to ensure you know how often to be watering. Now, just a couple of points here is very rarely would plants require watering every day. This is really not the case. And a lot of these people that water every day also don't water very much. They do very shallow watering, which is terrible. it's good for grass maybe, but not for plants. Plants, you got to get down to the bottom of that root ball, and then you have to allow it to dry out. They cannot sit in water for any periods of time. So if you find yourself you're watering every day, you may want to give us an email and explain what you're doing and how. Give us some information with respect to how quickly your holes drain, etc. Because the only person that would ever be watering every single day is somebody with beach sand, and we have them. That has happened where customers have beach sand, and literally during a heat wave they may have to water twice a day. But this is the exception. Very seldom are you going to find anybody that should be watering every day. For many people, every 2 days or so is more than enough. In a lot of cases, depending on the weather conditions, every 3 days would be enough. You have to make sure the water drains completely from the bottom of your inspection pipe before you water again. And as we mentioned before, the volume of water will stay pretty well consistent. What you have to change is the frequency, the hours between your watering. Now, during the second year, you're probably going to, well, you should stretch out the hours between waterings. You'll be watering less often the second year, but a little bit more water per watering because you now have a larger plant. It's going to require more water, but you don't have to water as often because the roots have gone down deeper and the plant can sustain itself better. And the same thing's going to happen with the following year. You'll constantly be spreading away or apart the frequency of the watering while increasing the water when you do water it. Now, just some common sense guidelines. Always water long and slow. Long because you want that water to penetrate down deeply to the bottom of the roots. You want it to get enough water and you want it to get it down deep. That's only going to happen if you do it slowly. If you do it real quickly with a lot of flow, yeah, you might be giving it 20 gallons of water, but it's not going near the root ball. It's running away. You're wasting your water. You'll get more bang for your dollar or your water dollar if you water slowly. Allow the water to seep in. You want to drown that root system, and then you're going to want it to dry out, at least you want it to drain. I shouldn't say dry out. You don't want it to go that far. You want it to drain completely, wait a day, and then you're going to flood it again. Water again only after completely drained to the point where the bottom of the root ball no longer has water sitting there. We can't stress this enough. You cannot allow the plant to sit in water for any period of time, and the bottom of that big old inspection pipe should not go dry. It should just go lightly moist. At that point, it's time to water again. Again, this is usually 24 hours after all the water has drained away, and then you can water again. No plant needs or wants to sit in water for long periods of time. It must drain completely. Adjust according to the weather. During cool, wet, or very cloudy weather, you can stretch the recommended time. Again, those guidelines we gave you are guidelines. You now have to adjust based on the weather. Things like the heat, the sun, the wind, they will dry your plants out, in which case you're going to have to increase the frequency, shorten the hours between your watering. You don't change the amount of water. It's the amount of hours between the watering. This encourages roots to stretch at a time when they're not being stressed by heat or sun. This point I'm making here is that if you run into some cool weather, a little bit of rain, etc., if the guidelines were every 48 hours, you may want to stretch that to 72 hours or even longer if it stays cool for quite a while, because the plant's not under a lot of stress. If it's cloudy, if there's no wind, if you've had a little bit of rain, all these things help to cool the plant down, and it doesn't require as much water. By allowing the soil to dry out a little bit, you force those roots to stretch at a time when they're not under stress. You don't want to stress the plant when it's being exposed to high winds, high heat, and strong sun. You're asking the plant to do too much. You take advantage of these cooler temperatures, cloudy days, to stretch out the watering, to increase the amount of hours between the watering. Be in touch with your plants. The problem with cedars is they do not communicate their needs very well. They tell you when they're in trouble, and it's too late then. In many cases, they're actually dead. You don't even know it, and nothing you can do is going to save that particular cedar. At the first sign of the leaves changing color, going a little bit faded, a little bit oily looking, you need to contact us right away. If you know if you've done wrong, well, then you can correct it yourself, get back on your watering schedule. But if you see this, it's the cedar telling you it's probably going to die. It's already too late, but at least you have a chance of saving the rest of them by getting everything back on track. If you wait till several die, chances are, before you get in touch with us, if you wait for several to die, chances are you're going to lose them all because they're probably already dead. They just haven't told you yet or haven't shown any signs. So do not hesitate. Do not wait. It's another reason why we say you should only deal with people that are around year round, because the ones that are here for a couple months disappear. You can't even talk to them during the summer months or fall when you need some advice about problems that you're having. You want to be able to contact these people as soon as possible. Do not delay. Uh, don't wait until you'll lose one completely. As soon as one looks a little funny, give us a call. Now, balled and burlap plants, especially cedars, which is what we're going to encourage you to use during the late April, early May. It's the best plant for that time of the year. They require heavy watering at first. So it's really important to stick with our schedule. Water heavy, let the water drain, and then within 24 hours you're going to water heavy again. And there'll be some special instructions you'll receive if you're not planting your cedars immediately. In other words, if you're picking up the plants on a Saturday morning, planting them by Saturday afternoon, not a big deal. They just take them and get ready to plant them. Not a big deal. If they're going to sit around for a day or two, we will be giving you some special instructions on how to protect them until they're ready to go into the ground. Now, when there is a problem with cedars, it's very common to hear they looked really good, and then all of a sudden they started fading in color. When questioned about water, and the response is usually, well, they started to fade, and then I started to water, but they just kept getting worse. The problem is they were already dead. It was too little, too late. Customers that run into trouble often felt that the plant looked good, then they don't need water. This is not the way cedars work. If they start to look just a little bit off, it's probably too late. They can't be allowed to be underwatered or overwatered. They need to have the proper amount of watering, and at the first sign of trouble, give us a call. There's several factors that affect watering requirements, and in particular, the water requirements we're talking about here is the hours between the watering. One is natural rainfall, the temperature, drainage of the soil, the wind exposure, sun exposure, surrounding plants that will compete for water and nutrients, drought conditions, if it's a dry summer, etc., and the type of root ball. Balled and burlap require different watering than plastic potted cedars. The length of time the tree has been planted will also affect the amount of, or the frequency of the watering. The longer it's in the ground, like the more years, the less often you're going to water, but the volume will increase. Now, natural rain is the best way for a plant to be watered, but it's never enough, especially during the first year. I can't think of, in all my years, any summer or year where a cedar would have done well or survived just relying on natural rainwater. You do definitely have to supplement the natural rainwater. And if you remember the summer of 2016, most of southern Ontario experienced extreme drought. Where in our particular area, we have a very low precipitation area here in Beamsville. We went almost 3 months without any significant type of rain. And definitely plants that were left alone in those conditions would have died. Surprisingly enough, there are people who thought that the natural rain was enough and when they shouldn't have had to water. But needless to say, those plants did die. You have to supplement your plants with water during the first year and for several years after that if you want good results. The more established a plant is, the less often you're going to have to water it, and depending on the weather, you'll have to adjust the amount of watering. But in all cases, during the first year, you'll definitely have to supplement it without a doubt. The second year, you might be able to decrease it quite a bit, but you're still going to have to be watering during that second year. And during the drought of 2016, people lost trees that were 20 years old because it was so dry. So a plant always needs to have water, and if you want it to do well. So be in touch with your weather, especially the amount of rain you're getting. That is a key factor. And at the first sign of a problem, make sure you do give us a call. Think of it as buying a new car. If your wheel starts to wobble a little bit, it's best to bring it into the dealership and have them check it out. Maybe just a couple of loose bolts. You can tighten up the wheel, and at the same time, they'll probably check all four of your wheels. It's the same with cedars. If you got a hedge of cedars, one's not looking too good. Hopefully, you can get that one back on track. But as we keep stressing, cedars, by the time they tell you they're in trouble, it's too late. That one there is likely a goner. The best you can do is try to save the rest of your cedars. Overall, we have less than 1% failure with our cedars, which we're very proud of. And the majority of that 1% is concentrated on just a couple of customers who basically had total complete failure, where all their cedars died. If you eliminate about, we'll say, 5 customers out of our thousands of customers that we have, you'd find that we are way below 1% in terms of our failure rate. So there's really no reason to be losing cedars. And most of the times that there is a problem, it's very concentrated to just a couple of customers every year. If your property looks like this after a rain, probably you've got some type of drainage situation here. If you take a look around there, you'll see the driveway is quite a bit higher than this low-lying area that flooded out. There's probably a taper away from the house to this low area again. And it's probably very heavy soil, so the water's not draining away very quickly. Use this as a red flag, or identify it as a red flag that's giving you a warning sign that this particular area is a possible problem when it comes to drainage. Know the amount of wind that you're being exposed to. If it's a wide open area out in the country someplace, especially say on top of the escarpment, you may have some extremely strong winds, which will dry out your plants, not just in the summer, but believe it or not, even in the winter. A lot of the winter browning that evergreens experience is because the root ball froze solid and could not draw up enough water to keep the plant fresh. And it's often caused by the wind. And as we mentioned earlier, you can shield this by putting, at least at the end that faces the predominant wind, some type of a barrier, such as a burlap barrier. Sun, just like wind, increases the amount of water that a plant requires. Both sun and wind will dehydrate the plant and remove moisture away from it. So the amount of sun that you're getting will affect the frequency of how often you have to water your plants. Cloudy days, less so. Sunny days. If there are any large trees near where you've planted your cedars, you are going to have some issues there too, because, for example, this large tree on the right side there, even if you don't plant up close to it, if you plant it anywhere near the canopy, those roots extend out to the point of the canopy, and they will suck the water from the ground in that area along with the nutrients. So, for example, a cedar hedge planted, a newly cedar hedge planted along that canopy or anywhere near the trunk of that tree is going to be competing for water and nutrients with that larger tree. And obviously the larger tree has a much bigger advantage over the new plants that aren't established yet. So very important to keep in touch with what's going on in that soil to make sure there's enough water for these new plants. A tree that large will use up to 200 gallons of water a day, and that's going to come from that entire area sucking the water away from the cedars. Here you take a look at the drought. This is reminds me of the summer of 2016, where there just wasn't any rain. The ground was rock hard in many areas, and it was really a challenge keeping the plants watered during that summer. But very surprisingly so, we had probably the lowest rate of failures ever during the summer. I think it's because people were so aware of the heat that they kept on top of the watering more so than they would have during a regular summer, where the plants are looking good and people kind of ease off by the end of the summer and not watering as often as they should, and then they end up with some problems, especially with cedars, because again, cedars don't tell you when they're in trouble. Some customers think if they look good, they're fine, but like I say, the summer of 2016 ended up not having that many failures simply because people were more in touch with the need of watering their plant. The size of the plant will affect the amount of water it's going to require. Here's an example. Here's a green giant cedar. As the plant gets this large, you're not going to have to water it very often,
You might only have to water this thing twice a summer, or maybe even only once a summer, depending on what kind of a summer you're having. Uh, so the frequency is going to be reduced. But when you do give it water, 5 or 10 gallons of water does absolutely nothing for a tree like this. If you're going to have an effect, you're going to have to give this thing a good 100 gallons of water. And if you ran into the drought of 2016, if you wanted this tree to stay healthy, you would have to give it quite a bit of water. Now, the type of root ball will have an effect on how often you water and when you water, especially to the point that they're in the ground. The balled and burlap type of plants like this will require more water by size of root ball than a similar sized plant and root ball if it was grown in a plastic pot. Now, here's a diagram showing fast to average drainage soil. This is soil that's going to drain in less than 24 hours. And if you see the water level there, it's literally above the ground by a couple inches. And the reason for this is that it's okay to flood the area. When you water, you want to flood it really heavy. And the important thing is you do not water again until everything drains. So there's nothing wrong with this as long as you have fast to average drainage soil. If it is slow, heavy soil, you do not want to flood it like this. You would only put half as much water, or basically the water would come halfway up the root ball. That's enough because it drains so slowly that that root ball will be able to siphon up the water that it requires without having as much water around the root ball. So here's a picture of a slow drainage soil setup where you see that you don't use as much water. This way the water will drain in the same amount of time as a regular drainage soil because there's less water to drain. During droughts, you should flood your plants and maybe even the slow draining soil. Again, it's a dynamic system where it's always changing, but as a rule, if you get to again, I hate to keep referring back to the summer of 2016, but that does stick in my mind. In a case like that, even if you had heavy clay soil, you may be watering above, like literally flood the area occasionally because it is so ridiculously dry. If you only watered the root ball area, the surrounding soil will actually siphon the water away. So you got to compensate for ridiculous situations like that summer, and in that case, you might actually be flooding an area of soil that has terrible drainage and will actually sit there for a day or two. And during those conditions, you're okay to do that. Again, all you're doing is providing water to the adjacent areas that are going to siphon that water away quickly. Here's a diagram depicting that idea that the water is moving away from the root ball. It's getting sucked away by the adjacent very dry. Now, here is a picture of the wrong way to water. And what you see is the blue bar on top of that root ball going across does not go down deep. Somebody just quickly watered the area really fast with a reasonable amount of water, but it's all sitting on top of the soil, and it's not going to be given an opportunity to run down to the bottom. It will run away off to the sides, etc., away from the root ball. What happens in this case is the bottom of the root ball doesn't get the water it needs. So the roots, if you look closely, are going towards the surface of the soil. They will move upwards to where the water is. Roots know where the water is located, and they will travel in that direction. However, this is not how you want your plant to grow. You want those roots to grow down. This is why you have to water the root ball heavy, allow the water to drain. Now the roots know that the water is moving away from it in a downward direction, and it will send its roots downwards, which is where you want. If you want to reduce your watering costs, this is how you do it, because the tree becomes self-sustainable because its roots are down deep. So you save money by watering properly. Trying to save a buck up front with this shallow watering, quick watering, it's going to cost you more down the road, and you're not going to have a happy, healthy plant. During some heavy windstorms, you'll see a large tree will be ripped out of the ground, and it shouldn't have happened. The reason that happens is because when the tree was young, it was trained for the roots to go to the surface. The roots did not go down deep and anchor the tree well. And the tree might survive for 20, 30 years, and then you get a strong wind, and it'll literally rip the tree out because the roots are not down deep where you want it to be. So never rely on sprinklers for watering your trees, whether it's cedars, deciduous trees. Sprinklers do not do a good job of watering. As we mentioned earlier, you have to get down deep. Sprinklers generally only wet the surface. They're good for grass. They're not good for trees. You have to supplement that water that the tree requires. Whatever the sprinkler is giving your plants, especially your larger plants such as a cedar or deciduous tree, it's not enough. You're going to have problems with the plants. And over 90% of the trouble that we've had with customers who have problems with their cedars or large trees is because they rely on sprinklers. You have to supplement that with direct watering right to the tree if you want good results. If you left the sprinklers on long enough to get down to the bottom of your root system, you probably have them on for 6 or 12 hours, believe it or not. That's how long it takes because the water is being dispersed over a large area and not necessarily with much pressure. And because of that, it's not sinking down deep to the bottom of that root ball. You've got to get right to the trunk of the tree, concentrated, slow dripping down the root system. And sprinklers do not work well at all with trees. Okay, now whenever you're planting in hot or dry weather, you should always fill your holes first with water. And again, we recommend this even if it's not hot or dry. Always fill your holes with water first. This will tell you how well your water is, or how well your soil drains. But during hot or dry weather, you definitely must fill your holes with water because the soil surrounding the area is dry. If you just plant a tree and then you water it, that water is going to dissipate very quickly in that surrounding soil. By filling your holes with water first and then planting the next day, that allows some of that water to siphon into the surrounding soil, and then when you put your new plant in there and water that again very heavily, the plant's got some moisture to live on for a while. Versus, so you think you just gave the thing a lot of water, and literally within a couple hours that water's gone. The surrounding soil has taken it.
And how quickly does your soil drain? You have to answer this question because it's so critical. As we said before, the main reason cedars fail is because of the roots. We'll take care of the roots. When you come to us, you're going to get a good root system. You don't have to worry about that. The next thing is watering them properly. We can't do that for you. That falls under your responsibility, but we will guide you every step of the way to make sure you do it right. And the first step is to check your soil to see how well it drains. The best way to actually check the soil is by digging a hole in preparation for your cedars and fill it with water. Make note of how long it takes to drain completely, and share the information with us when you come in and talk to us about the cedars, and we'll work out a schedule for you on how often you should be watering based on how quickly your holes drain. Also, is the area where you're going to be planting the cedar a low spot relative to the rest of the area? Does water puddle up in this area after a rain? Is it in the back of a new subdivision? Many of these new subdivisions, their backyards taper down to a center point where it gives it a common drainage between the two backyards. And people will plant down that low area because they want to get some privacy from their neighbor. This low area, generally water accumulates there. So you have to keep that in mind. And even if you were to plant upslope from the bottom, you still may have a watering issue because if it's hard clay, the water runs over the surface and it will fall into the first batch of soft soil that it has, which is going to be around your new trees. And even though you get a half an inch of rain, you may have 2 feet of water in that hole because your whole backyard acts like a roof, and the water runs down that slope and it drops down into the hole around the root ball that you've just prepared for that new plant. And then that tree may be sitting in water for long periods of time if you've got heavy soil. So you have to be able to monitor how much water is sitting down there, and we go through that in our other videos where we talk about watering your plants. Here's a side sketch of, say, a backyard with a slope to it. The green down line is your backyard. At the very bottom you'll see there's a blue line, and this is where the water is going to end up accumulating. Again, if you were to plant upslope on that line, that green line, and you dig a hole down, the water would now accumulate inside that hole. Even though it's not the lowest point in the backyard, relatively it is the lowest point because you've got the soft soil that allows the water to drain down to the bottom of that soil until it hits the hard soil at the bottom of your hole. One way to get around that, if you're planting up a slope, is if you want to imagine this, you're up in the air looking down on your backyard. The hole is the blue hole there with the word hole in the center is what you've prepared for your new plant, and just above that is a half moon. And the idea of that half moon is to prepare a dam or a diversion for the water that's running down the slope of your backyard, which is the blue arrows. Those blue arrows, when they get to that dam, will now bounce off it to the side, run past the hole. So rather than running down into the hole, they're running past the hole, and this way the hole doesn't overfill with water, keeping the root system too wet for too long. Make note if you have any downspouts that are coming towards the new plants that you're putting in, because if you do have a downspout, you have to keep in mind that the water from that roof area is all going to come down into a very small concentrated area, and that area is going to be a lot wetter than what you would expect, especially compared to the rest of the yard, which will be much drier. So despite people believing that cedars want to be wet all the time, they really don't want to be wet all the time. They want to be lightly moist all the time, but not sitting in water. It's just like a human being. If they sat or were below water for too long a period of time, they would suffocate. And so would the roots of cedars or any other plants. There are very few plants that can actually sit in water for any period of time. Some hydrangea varieties can tolerate water for long periods of time, but generally speaking, most plants cannot. So if you see areas like this in your backyard, that is an area where water is accumulating for one reason or another. It might be a low point, there might be a downspout from your house, your neighbor's house, runoff from a driveway, a patio, etc. But that's a red flag right there. Here's a beautiful patio, probably about 100 feet across from the grass up towards the house. And keep in mind that there's probably a downward slope on that patio towards the grass. And what's going to happen when it rains, if you get a half an inch of rain, which is that's a pretty good rain, all that water that's falling down the patio is going to accumulate as it runs down the slope and then just drop off the edge. So at the very edge of this patio, you're not going to get half an inch of rain. You're going to get 2 feet of rain, literally, coming down in that one small area. So that area is going to get very wet, and if there isn't good drainage, if it's not real sandy soil, and most people don't have real sandy soil, that water is going to sit there for quite a while. And if you've got really heavy clay, it could end up being wet permanently. So again, test holes are very important to keep an eye on what's going on with drainage, but this is a red flag easily seen on a basic site inspection. And keep this in mind when you're looking around your backyard, patios, driveways, etc. They are all going to have runoff, and they multiply the amount of water that is present along the edge there where you may be placing plants. Now, salting is very common on sidewalks and driveways, etc. Obviously, the benefit is that it eliminates the ice, makes it a safer walking surface. However, plants do not like salt. There is no plant that likes salt. Some plants will tolerate it better than others. We encourage you to use absolutely no salt around any of the plants, regardless. However, if there's a situation where there may be a minimal amount of salt that you just can't prevent because of a road or a sidewalk, etc., you're best to use black cedars. They can tolerate salt. Again, they don't like it, but they can tolerate some salt, and you'll have better results with them because the salt will kill most plants. So don't waste your money on the plants or the time of planting them. If you plan on using salt, don't even put them in there. So don't plant your cedars near any large trees. Keep in mind the canopy that's above the ground there, the leaves, down below, that's about how far the roots will spread out. And at the very edges, it's quite thin, but they will still suck up a lot of water right to the edge of that canopy. So anything planted underneath that canopy is going to be in competition with a much, much larger tree that's going to have a lot more success. A typical large tree will suck up 100 to 200 gallons of water a day, believe it or not. And any cedar that's in that area is going to have a hard time getting its water or the nutrition that it needs to do well. Not to mention it's probably in the shade also if it's underneath that canopy. Now, how would you describe the wind in your area? Keep this in mind and bring that information with you when you come down, because it will affect on what variety of cedars we may recommend to you, or to give you some strategies on how to prevent wind damage. Generally speaking, if it's a very congested subdivision, you're going to have protection one way or another. But even within subdivisions, where there's a lot of houses and trees around already, what you could get is some very concentrated wind tunnels between the homes. The homes nowadays might be as close as 6 or 8 feet apart from each other, and you're going to have all that wind being diverted around the edge of the house and down that wind tunnel. So you can have some pretty strong winds, even in, say, a protected subdivision area. A wooden fence along where your cedars are going to be is usually a good idea. It reduces the wind through the plant itself, as well as providing a little bit of shade to the ground. So during the hot summer months, it does keep the ground a little bit cooler. Now be sure you're getting at least 4 hours of full direct sun for your cedars. Some plants can tolerate a lot of shade, or all shade actually, such as boxwoods or yews. Those are nice evergreens if you've got very shady areas. However, cedars must have at least 4 hours of full sun every day.
Now, we don't recommend that you ever water the leaves of your trees, especially deciduous plants. You should never water the leaves of a deciduous plant. Always water at the base of the plant itself. Cedars are a little different. You don't need to water their leaves. However, if you run into a situation where during your first year you're into heat waves, what you can do is water the leaves. This is in addition, of course, to watering the root system. This is not a supplement for watering the root system. This is in addition to it. You can spray water onto the leaves early morning, say 7 in the morning, and then again at 7 at night. Again, this is just a supplement to your good watering, deep watering of the root system. Another time you can water, or we recommend that you water your evergreens, is during the frost period, which is up until the end of May. You can spray your trees down just before you go to bed at night. This way, if there is any frost, that water that you sprayed on would have turned to ice by that point, and the ice protects the plant from the frost. Ice does not hurt the plant at all. You may actually use that idea of spraying your leaves on new deciduous plants that are planted early in the year, again up until the end of May. The other option, of course, is to throw a bed sheet over top of the plant itself. You don't want to be doing this on a regular basis with your evergreen trees. That is constantly spraying the leaves. During heat waves, not a problem. Go ahead. Frost threat, go ahead, not a problem. But if you were to do this on a regular basis with an evergreen tree, you'll actually create lazy roots. The roots will feel they don't have to do their job, which is to bring the moisture up to the leaves. So this thing of watering the tree, the evergreens, is okay, but only during exceptional situations. One other situation where you may want to water the leaves on an evergreen tree, and in fact it's a good idea, is if you have spider mites. Occasionally, cedars in particular can get spider mites, as can Alberta dwarf spruce trees, and pretty well any evergreen can get them. If they do get these spider mites, you may not see them. They're very tiny and difficult to see them, but you'll see the spider webs. And these will stress out a tree. Usually it won't kill the tree, but it can stress them out, and in some cases it will actually kill the tree. So if you're going into a situation where you're seeing these spider webs over top of your cedars, especially if they're young and new, you may want to use the water hose to actually knock those webs off. If you do that for several days in a row, the spider mite usually decides to pack its bags and move on to someplace else, leaving your particular plants alone. So there is a case where you may want to use water again on the evergreens. Now be a smart gardener and do it right the first time. Proper root ball is not an option. You got to have the right root ball, otherwise everything else is a waste of time. If you're not familiar with what we're talking about here with the root ball, be sure you watch the other info videos that we have that will explain to you the importance of a proper root ball. That is the responsibility of the grower slash garden center, because these are the only people that can ensure you're getting a proper root ball. Most customers cannot tell the quality of that root ball. And keep in mind that an expensive seeder does not assure a good seeder, but an inexpensive seeder is almost a guarantee, because you simply can't transport a 40 or 50, 60, 70 pound seeder and sell it for $15 or $20. Is you'd be paying people to take the plants away, literally. The only way you can do that is by cultivating an improper root ball, getting the weight of that root ball down, transporting their bare root, and then potting it up later, which is basically a guaranteed formula for failure. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that an expensive seeder was done correctly either, because the exact same seeders that you can buy at the big box stores for, say, $15 or $20 are also sold by some established, reputable garden centers who feel that they have to do the same thing in order to compete. The only difference is with these established garden centers, they don't sell them for $15 or $20. They'll actually put a price tag of $80 on them, for example. They'll have a big 50% off sale, a big blowout sale, sell for $35, and then there's no warranty because they're on sale. So a lot of these garden centers, if the plants are on sale, especially half price, etc., there is no warranty. And this eliminates the loss of the plants dying for the garden center, but the customer loses by buying a plant that's going to die, and then he has to replace it. And a year later, he's out the money, and he's out the work, and he's got no plant. So be careful about what you're buying out there. Make sure that you can trust the people you're dealing with, and that you have a proper root ball. Because without that proper root ball, you can do everything else perfectly right, and they're still going to fail on you. So follow the instructions of the source, for the reason being that that is the person that's going to replace it for you should you have a problem, and they're the people that are going to be guiding you if you have a problem. Every root ball has a different cultivation method. The advice we give is for our system. There's other growers out there, garden centers, etc. They don't cultivate the roots like we do, and perhaps our advice is not the best for those type of seeders. You need to talk to them, follow their instructions, because again, they are the people that are going to back up your seeder. And again, like I say, just do it right the first time if you can, because it's going to save you time and money. But now we encourage all of our customers to contact us immediately if you suspect that even one plant looks a little bit off, because that's the early warning signs. And believe it or not, as soon as one seeder starts to look a little bit off, that particular seeder probably can't be saved. They generally have no warning time whatsoever to the customer. Once the plant starts to look a little bit faded, that plant will probably die. You can try saving it. We'll give you the best advice we can, but it's possible that that one's lost. However, you can still save the rest of them, hopefully. So you got to move quickly with seeders. You can't delay. Waiting until all the seeders are half faded out, or you've lost several of them, by that point, chances are the rest are also going to be threatened. So contact us immediately with any concerns you have. If you find you have to deviate from the watering instructions we've given you, talk to us. We want to help you out. We want to see 100% success, and we want you to have an established hedge the following year. We don't want to see you replacing all your trees next year. Now, with the deciduous plants, it's a little different. In this particular photo, what you see is a Japanese maple with burnt leaves. Now, the nice thing about deciduous trees, whether it's Japanese maples or Norway maples or ornamental pear trees, whatever, they're a lot more forgiving. They will tell you that they are in trouble. You will be able to save them, even if the leaves get burnt like this. In this particular case, Japanese maple having a burnt leaf will dry out faster than a green leaf. Burgundy will heat up quicker than a green leaf. And this is a double-edged sword with this particular situation. We encourage you not to let the tree go this dry, but the reason or the problem with this is that you're going to have an ugly tree for the rest of the year. The good news is that this tree is actually going to have possibly better roots because of the situation. What happens is the tree starts to shut down and divert all of its efforts to the root system and try to keep the tree alive. That's why it shuts down the supply of water to the leaves. In doing so, it spreads out the fibers for its root systems. So it's actually not the end of the world when you start to see burnt leaves on most deciduous trees. Again, cosmetically not very attractive. Good news is that it's probably a stronger tree, but you have to water it. Now that it's told you it's in trouble, you have to go back and you have to start watering this tree on a regular basis. You obviously have neglected it. And again, sometimes you may have done a pretty good job, but summer of 2016, very hot, very dry. It doesn't take much to see a situation like this on a Japanese maple. You go away for a week or two and you ask somebody to water your plant, and chances are it probably didn't get watered the way you think it should be getting watered. And when you come back, you'll see this, and we often hear this. I just came back from vacation, and the leaves on my Japanese maple are all brown. Well, again, good news is that it's probably not dead, not going to be pretty, but best just to leave it in the ground, get back to a watering schedule, and the next year it'll be fine. In fact, I hate to say this, is probably even going to be better than otherwise, but we don't want you to push your tree this far. Not really a good idea. You might have pushed it too far, and then you're going to lose the tree. But now you may not be able to see the difference or the problem, but here's a photograph sent in from a customer, and the one on the right is dead. Okay, some people say, "Oh, it doesn't look too bad. It's got some green." No, it's dead. It's going to die, and it did die. The one on the left and the rest of this customer's cedars, we were able to salvage them because they contacted us early enough. As soon as they saw that one particular one not looking very good, they contacted us, gave us information, how often they were watering, the type of soil they had, etc. We put them back on track, and they got back on a proper watering schedule, proper amount of watering, and all the rest of them survived and thrived during that the summer. This was summer of 2016, this particular picture. But the one on the right is dead. It's not coming back. And people need to understand that with cedars, once they start to go, they're pretty well gone. Also, keep an eye for patterns of health or stress based on the relative locations of the plant. If you've got a 100-foot row of cedars and it's only 3 in the center that are showing problems, and the other ones are looking super good, and you notice that that area there is a low-lying area or possibly a high-lying area, is there something different about that location where those 3 are starting to show some fading out of color? Look for patterns in your plants. Because you can usually see it. That's why we always ask people, if you've got a problem, email us, give us details, and send pictures of the entire area, including the good ones. We want to see your whole backyard. We can pick out a pattern that you might not be able to. And sometimes it's just your dog. Your dog in particular likes the end of that row, and he'll be hitting that dog. So we've run into those situations in the past, and by sending us a photograph of your backyard, we can see things that you might not see. So please do that when you want to contact us with information. A common concern, especially during the first fall, is a lot of browning in the center of cedars. This is totally normal. What happens is every cedar, even if it's established, that's 20 years old, is going to lose its 3-year-old leaves. So what that means is that the old leaves, which are now covered inside by a couple of layers, are going to die off. So you'll see the browning inside. During the first year of cedars, you will see this in the fall, and it's going to look worse than normal. Number one, you're paying more attention to it because it's your new investment. And number two, you actually might lose the second and third year needles on there. So you're going to lose 2 years of needles in one season. The reason for this is because of the transplanting shock. It's nothing to worry about. As long as the outside is still green and vibrant, you should expect to see a high level of browning inside. But again, any doubts, any questions, send us a photograph. You will see on occasion spots of brown leaves on a cedar, and this will usually happen early on in the summertime or in the middle of the summer. Shortly after you've planted these, you'll see that the tree is pretty healthy looking, except there's a brown spot here and a brown spot there. If you look closely, you'll probably notice that those particular specific brown leaves are damaged. They're broken. It happens in handling, either from the time they were loaded at the farm to the many times they're handled till they get to our site, to the time we put them in your vehicle, to the time they get to your backyard. People are grabbing them. To minimize that, always reach inside the cedar and grab the trunk with your hands. Never handle a cedar by the leaves. Workers will sometimes do this because it's more convenient, but it does damage the leaves, and then you'll see a flurry of browning occur after several weeks. But again, it's not the whole plant. It's going to be little spotted areas, and if that's the case, nothing to worry about. It's just a cosmetic. However, any questions, send us a picture.
Every year we try to improve our advice for watering plants, especially cedars. And this year we've added a few new features, one that will improve the communication. In the past, we've always tried our best. I think we've done a pretty good job in communicating instructions, but there always seems to be something else that we've learned every year where we can make it even better. This year, what we're going to be doing a little differently, or in addition to the normal verbal instructions when you come in here, the info videos that we put on the internet, and the written instructions that you will receive, what we'll also do is actually design a custom watering schedule based on your specific drainage situation. And this is why we'd like you to come in with that information in terms of how quickly your soil drains, so that we can work with you and we can give you as best as possible guidelines as to how often to be watering and how much to be watering. And again, we do this at no charge to you. In addition, if we are delivering the plants to you, we will also do a free site inspection when we show up there. What we'll do is we'll walk around your property and we'll look for possible situations that may cause stress to your plants. May not be visible to you, but because of our experience, we may be able to see a situation that you can alter or improve to improve the results that you're going to get with your plants. And if you have any other suggestions at any time on how we can improve our communications to you, please let us know. We're always open to suggestions.
Now, winter watering is important. A lot of times people think that once you get to the fall, you can stop watering. Again, if I want to go use the summer of 2016, we went into the fall of 2016. The soil was dry because we didn't get much rain even at the end of the summer. It was dry right into the winter and right into November. The ground was dry, and we really weren't getting the enough rain to compensate for that. So it's always important to take your watering into the fall if you've got these dry conditions like we had during that summer. And in all cases, no matter what, you always give your evergreens a very, very large amount of water once just before the ground freezes, or around that period of time. Usually I just tell people, before you put your garden hose away for the winter, make sure you go out there and you flood all your evergreens, especially ones that just got planted. And it's good to put cedar mulch over top of your root system. Keeps the moisture in over the winter, keeps some warmth into the ground, because if those roots they will suck water up and bring it to the tree, which will keep them looking greener, healthier, and you might actually get a little bit of growth over the winter time if the conditions are good. But if they're dry, you'll actually get some winter browning on your evergreens. So always use mulch over the root system. Do not use rocks. I believe the rocks will conduct the heat away, causing the roots to be colder, freezing up sooner. If the roots are frozen, that itself does not kill the plant directly, but it inhibits the ability of that plant to suck up the water. So don't put any rocks over top of that root system. Only mulch, and preferably cedar mulch. Avoid wrapping your trees. It's a common practice. You'll see people wrap their trees, and that does as much harm as good. We recommend that if you have issues with wind exposure, that rather than wrap the trees, you use bars or poles or something around the tree, and you wrap the material around those poles, keeping the material off of the tree. You don't want to touch the tree with your burlap material. By doing this, what you do is you slow down the wind that would be moving through that particular tree, which will reduce the drying out of that tree. But you avoid the threat of it overheating. The burlap, when you wrap a plant tight together, you reduce the amount of heat dissipation, which is important during sunny days in the wintertime, and you might even get a little bit of a heat wave once in a while in the winter. And if they're wrapped up like that, they'll actually overheat. And sometimes when you do this, you unwrap them in the springtime, they look fine, and then 2 months later they're dead. and this is the cause of it. So we do not like to see people wrap their trees directly. Use a post, keep it away from the tree, and we'll show you some pictures of that shortly. Here's a diagram showing a top-down view of, for example, 4 cedars. And you see there's posts at every corner, and then the burlap material is wrapped around the posts. By doing so, you're not touching the trees. This was sent in from one of our customers. Thank you, Mark. And he did an excellent job wrapping his new black cedars. And you can see that he's not touching the cedars. He's about 2 or 3 inches away from the cedars on the side there. And he did a very meticulous job, and he sheltered these on all sides. He's up on the escarpment, and he does have wind exposure. So it's definitely a good idea to provide his new trees with this wind protection. And the burlap material is reusable, so it'll last you the lifetime of these plants and more plants. Now, one thing you notice, these trees here that Mark put in, these were 6-footers, I believe, and the material doesn't go right to the top, and that's okay. As long as you're covering some of that, the body, you reduce the dehydration of the leaves, so it is effective. And as the trees grow larger, or if you're planting, say, 6-footers or larger ones the first year, it will be difficult to protect them top to bottom. But this in itself will do quite a bit to prevent the leaves from drying out at the lower levels, which will help the leaves at the upper level. On the left side, you see there's a weeping spruce that was burlapped using the post idea. That we like. That's a good way of doing it. The one on the right is what we do not recommend. You'll see this quite often done. Landscapers, they have a contract to do a job in a certain way, and that's how they do it. Don't recommend it at all.
We do offer our retail customers the option of purchasing wholesale, assuming that they meet the minimum requirement of plants. Now, to get any type of wholesale arrangement, you have to buy at least 20 of the same variety and same size plant. And for most homeowners, we won't even suggest that you go that way. Won't even bring it up probably, because that 15% that you're saving is not worth losing our 5-year warranty, or not getting our bone meal and getting mulch and fertilizer at no cost. You have to buy those separately, so it's probably not worth your effort to even consider it. This is generally mostly attractive for people that are flipping houses. They're looking very short term in terms of the plants, and they want to get the lowest price regardless. So they will often opt for that. Even 15% off, they'll take it regardless of what it means in terms of the warranty, etc. But for most homeowners, we do not recommend you take that. Once you start getting over 30 plants or more, now it's something you may want to start considering because it becomes more attractive with the larger volumes, all the way up to 40% off when you're purchasing 100 or more. I do want to point out that once you get over the 35% or 30% to 40%, you have to put the order in before March 1st, as we pre-dig all of our plants in March for our April sales, and we need to have the larger numbers like that cemented and confirmed before March 1st. Now, wholesale pricing does not include the 5-year warranty, or the root stimulant, the mulch, or the fertilizer. In addition to that, the wholesale deliveries are only done directly off the back of the truck and directly onto the ground. Retail deliveries, we can place them anywhere you want on the property, up to 150 feet away from the unload location of the truck. For more details, you can either email us or look at the website for more information.
Happy gardening from all of us at Save on Plants. Thank you for visiting our website, and if you have any more questions, you can email us at the email address below. As well, be sure to watch our other info videos, especially the ones on planting and watering, to ensure your success. Thank you, and enjoy the season.